Ben Riggs presents Reading D&D Aloud. Episode 44, D&D in front of an audience with PowerPoints.
Greetings, vast swaths of geekerati. I am apparently controversial historian Ben Riggs. This is Reading D&D Aloud, and today we are speaking with someone that I think has a fascinating and unusual perspective on tabletop role-playing games and geek culture in general. This is Cory Burns. Hi, Cory.
Hello, thank you for having me, Ben. I'm really excited to be here on your channel.
My pleasure. Thank you for coming. And Corey is here because he is the creator of the Common Lands, as well as Adventures Improvised. And could you explain what Adventures Improvised is for those who, the benighted masses that may not know?
Oh, yes. So Adventures Improvise, to put it pretty simply, this is our tagline, actually. It's the greatest fantasy tabletop role-playing sketch comedy improv PowerPoint you'll ever see in probably the Chicagoland area only.
Now,
Um,
I'm going to say watched 20 minutes of this at WindyCon in November, and that description is pretty accurate, actually, in every single way. Because there's people playing D&D, there's audience participation, and there's a PowerPoint. But could you weave a picture for the audience of what they would see if they sat down and began watching Adventures Improvised?
Yeah, so I am a special education teacher by day. I am a college professor by night. I teach comp and usage and business English, and I run a small business with all the hours I have in between when I'm not raising my 6-year-old and 1.5-year-old with my wife. And so, one day, one of my very good friends who worked with the Laugh Out Loud Theater in Schaumburg approached me and said, you're funny, but you make really good PowerPoints, and I have an idea. And so the theater company contracted me to write them a Dungeons and Dragons themed comedy show. And I had some ideas, and I worked with my good buddies Zach Paith to put it together. And we have sold over, we've probably done about 12 shows. And I would say we've probably sold somewhere in the range of 1,200 to 1,300 tickets to people. And, our first 3 shows were packed houses. One of the things that makes the show super unique, you might have seen, is that you use your cell phone to interact because the PowerPoint has embedded into it some polling options and some other, fun little things that are engaging for audiences who maybe don't want to just scream out words like your typical improv show.
So there's a PowerPoint. People are participating on their phones. When the show starts, the lights go down, you come out, but what happens next?
Well, I am it's funny because this is a parallel in Dungeons and Dragons. You know how it is when you're the forever DM? Well, I'm actually the forever DM for this improv show, and I'm actually looking for talent to take over because I very much want to be talking to people about D&D and my new book, Wanderverse, and some of my other projects that I've worked on, like the Bardic Book of Ballads. And so I am the forever DM, and I come out and in this particular show, I introduce how the rules work to the audience. I introduce how our digital participation software works, your phone. We call it a DPS. And I run the story. I run the improv games, and I am out there with everybody, cracking jokes and having a good time.
How many players do you have on stage?
That depends. So the way we operate is we try to write at least 1 to 2 new stories per year, and we typically have 3 to 4 players, 3 to 4 heroes, as we call them. 3 of them will be heroes who are cast to be player characters, and then we usually have what we call as like a utility character. And historically, what we've done is we've had a bard who's kind of like this intermediary between DM and characters who kind of steps in. I don't know if you've ever seen The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the old Disney one, but like, how I got that little narrator who pops in every now and then and he's like, let's take a look at what they're doing. And then you slide over. So some of the shows, we always try to operate with 3 cast members, but some of the shows do have up to 4 cast members for our heroes and a game master. And then I would be remiss if I did not mention our absolutely amazing assistant game master and tech wizard, Melanie G. She just like the things she can do is it's truly supernatural.
And how long does a show normally last?
That's a great question because in the past our shows have been 2 hours with a pretty solid intermission. So you really get your money's worth. One of the things we've been trying to do as part of our business model is shift our stage to the convention scene because we feel like, there's a lot of people that like improv, there's a lot of people in the theater community, and we're going to keep doing that. But we need some short form stuff that we can bring to conventions. And so we have a couple of 2 hour shows. We have a 90-minute show, and then we have a 45-minute show. And we are bringing it. We brought it to WindyCon. We brought it to Capricorn. We just got invited to GaryCon next year, and we will be at Gamehole Con, I believe in October. So that's picking up a lot for us. We're looking into Gen Con, but it's just hard to get our cast schedules aligned, and that's been kind of the problem with getting out of state. We're all adults, busy schedules.
Man, I mean, it certainly seems like you would slay at Gen Con. A little bit of promoting, do it someplace with alcohol. Is alcohol like the places you've been performing? Is there generally alcohol being consumed, or is it more of a theater environment?
Well, when we play at some of the when we play at some of the theaters that we've been at, that they have alcohol there, and that's a big part of why we're able to actually, um, you know, get a cut. I guess at the end of the day, instead of just doing this as a hobby, is because they want us to bring people in to sell, booze, and we want people to come in to watch us, and so it kind of has a
And
quid
booze
pro
makes them a better
quo.
audience.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. Sometimes, I mean, honestly, sometimes. You know what, man? We at Capricorn, everybody there was so highbrow, intelligent with some of their suggestions, and I was really enjoying that. We played some improv games that played with words and puns, and one of the words that was a suggestion was the word ruler, and everyone was using it like your traditional measurement tool. And one of our guests was like, "But what about like a king?" And I just, it's awesome. It's awesome to get a variety of crowds, and the booze helps sometimes, but honestly, you know what makes the show really, really good? Kids. Every time we have a lot of kids who come to the show, because it's an all ages show, we let halflings in. It really pops, and the kids, they just get so into it, and I think they kind of ease the tension for some of the other people to laugh because they're having a good time. So, um, the kids, when we can bring kids into the show too, I feel like that usually helps make it a much better production.
And it's like you have prompts for a story, but then there's audience input, and the actors don't have lines. They are reacting improvisationally, correct?
Correct. So there are certain things that are just always going to happen in every show, but the audience gets to pick kind of how they're dictated, or maybe some of the games that we're going to play. So, like, here's a classic example. We walk into a room, there's a mysterious bookshelf. It's filled with leather-bound tomes. One of them is calling to you. It has a magical aura. The player will go, "I'm going to check out that book with the magical aura." And then we'll send a prompt to the audience through the PowerPoint and on their phones that says, "What's in the book?" And then, even though they're going to do the book no matter what, the game that they play or the content that they go through that would be inside of that book that was pulled in the story is dictated by the audience.
That's
There are
cool.
also like some cool lay-ons that the audience gets to pick. Like for our long form shows, the characters have backgrounds that the audience picks for them that like they'll use throughout the entire story.
So I have to admit the first thing I wrote down here on my note page as we started talking was he makes great PowerPoints. Um, can you tell me about what it means to be someone who makes great PowerPoints? What does it look like?
Yeah, well, okay, so it all started in my undergrad. I'm very tech focused. I love tech. My master's thesis was in educational technology. And in my undergrad, I took this course and it was all about differentiating material. And I'll never forget how the teacher was telling us, they're like, yeah, you can just turn a PowerPoint into like an animated story. And I made this whole like storybook about a hedgehog that gets hungry and it lost its mom and it's trying to find its mom and there's like voiceovers and layers of objects and it looked like a children's book and I find that stuff so fun and relaxing, and so that's what I do when I make a Wanderverse improvised show, an Adventures improvised show. Is I create some very simple backdrop graphics. Some of them are animated, and some goofy things pop up.
All right. So we're also going to do some. So n not only are you a novel presence on this channel because you come from a sort of performing side of the tabletop role playing game community. I think like we've had actors and actresses on before, but they weren't people who were like, their thing was like doing D&D or something. They just happened to be D&D nerds and actors. And I was like, hey, let's have a conversation because you're actors. Um, so you are the first person who is a producing D&D tabletop role-playing game content to be consumed not by players, but by an audience that we've had on the show. So in addition to breaking new
Mhm.
ground there, let's talk a little bit about Dune. You're really into Dune?
Oh, I'm into the Duniverse. I've liked it for a long time. I'm really into sci-fi. One of the just pitfalls of my life is the fact that my friends, I have maybe like 25, 30 people I play tabletop games with, and I can't get one of them to nerd out and play a sci-fi tabletop game. Like the best I can do is Star Wars, and it just breaks my heart because there are so many that I just haven't had a chance to try with friends. Like Starfinder, the Dune RPG that came out relatively recently. What else? I mean, there's some old Star Wars D6 Pip one that I wanted to. I did get to play that one. That was super fun. Just like sci-fi themes and other like basic modern style tabletop games. It's hard, man. I like the sci-fi genre, and it's hard for me to find a community around that to game.
Where do you live in Illinois?
I'm in Schaumburg right now, the Dirty Burg as it's known. Nobody calls it that, but I call it that. Anyways, yeah, I live out in Schaumburg. It's super cool. I
The
frequent
Dirty Bird.
Grognard. I frequent Grognard Games, which is like right around the corner for me. In fact, I would say they're my friendly local game store. And man, if I wasn't doing like 85 hours a week, that and I was just a young man, like I'd be there finding somebody to play some Dune games. But
Well, I
yeah,
mean,
the
you're what?
feudalism.
You're 90 minutes from Milwaukee?
No, no, no. I'm sorry if I misspoke. I am. If I was a younger man and I was able to just do what I want and I wasn't working 85 hours a week, I would probably be at my friendly local game store finding a community to try out that new Dune RPG.
Yeah,
Because
but I was asking, you're 90 minutes from Milwaukee because I'm in Milwaukee and I have a
oh,
whole table of Dune nerds. So there's always room for one more Dune nerd.
well, I work in Libertyville, so that's like halfway there.
Yeah. So we'll talk sometime because
Yeah, I would love.
like if not the Dune game, Stars Without Number, like have you played any Stars Without Number or seen it?
No, I'm not familiar.
Oh, okay. So, Stars Without Number is a sci-fi OSR retro clone. So
Wow.
it's trying to imitate the best of early D&D plus Traveler, but sci-fi. So on the one hand, the system is really, really simple, but on the other hand, they kind of have everything you need to do sci-fi in one book. And the basic rules are free on Drive-Thru RPG. If you pay for a PDF, it gives you like mech rules and AI rules. Pardon me, but the system is just so elegant, fast, easy. And again, it's kind of got this D&D core, but a bunch of other cool stuff that's tacked on. And again, it's just so simple and so easy and fun to run with. I've played some Stars Without Number, but not enough because in my mind, one day I will sit down and run my epic science fiction campaign. Like I keep picking up little dribs and drabs here of things that I'm like, oh, when I run my epic science fiction campaign, of course I'll need a book on mercenaries, things like that. And I have a pretty good Monday night game group, but I keep thinking about this the campaign that I have not yet run, and it's achieved an epic status. So of course when I sit down to do it, it's just gonna, be like a duck fart in the wind. Um, but okay, since we're going to talk about Dune, I am going to read what I is my favorite piece of Dune, and it's certainly nothing that people haven't heard before, since there's a Denis Villeneuve movie now. But when I read Dune when I was 12, this just jumped down my throat and has stayed in my body ever since. Quote, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. And of course, that is the Bene Gesserit litany against fear. Corey, do you want to say something about that, or should I?
I would like to share one of my favorite quotes, which is from Gurney Halleck, which is mood. Mood is for cattle and love play, not fighting.
And what is it
Sorry,
about that?
I didn't
Go
mean
ahead,
to kill the epicness of the quote that is obviously one of the best things that came out of Frank Herbert's writings. It's just like pure poetry on paper. But yeah, the comedy guy has to make the comedy joke, right?
No, that's good, but why does that speak to you, or did you just want to punctuate the air that I had been cultivating?
I a little bit of that, and but not intentionally because I actually side with you very much. So that's to me that's one of the most powerful things about the entire book, and one of
To
my big things about Dune that I would love to discuss too, and this is something that I actually got into a debate with a good friend at work. Is it just feudalism, or did George R. Martin? And you're the historian here, so maybe you know this kind of stuff. Did George R. Martin? Is there somewhere where he basically explains that yes, I almost explicitly stole just everything I did in Song of Ice and Fire from Dune?
I mean, I don't know about the George R. R. Martin thing. But sorry, what was the first half of what you just said? Um,
I just was saying like I didn't what about puncturing what you were
oh yeah, okay, gotcha. Um, yeah, as far as I know, I am not a Song of Ice and Fire guy. Like I read the first book and then I saw the TV show and I thought it was really, really good. And then the TV show wasn't very good and it was very sad.
Okay, if you
Um,
don't mind, this is something. Okay, I thought George had done this. I haven't seen it online anywhere. Okay, I really scoured the internet trying to find this, and I'm sure there's going to be like one person who's like, it's right here, and you didn't find it because that's how YouTube works. But I swear to you, like when you really break it down, obviously, A Song of Ice and Fire extremely popular, but it's like Paul Atreides is a combination of all the Stark boys together. I mean, he has the supernaturalism of Bran, he has that sort of headstrong attitude of Robb. I mean, he also. I mean, when you look at House Atreides and House Stark have so many similarities, where they're thrust into a foreign place, where they know they shouldn't go because it's so treacherous and evil. When another house family is looking to take them out, the Lannisters are to the Harkonnens, and it's just like, and then you have the wildlings to the people of Arrakis, the free people of Arrakis, right? And it's just like the comparisons go on and on and on, and it's like, oh, why is this book so good? Oh, you know why those books are so good? Because they're Dune. And people like fantasy more than sci-fi, and I'm right back to the start of where I was kvetching because I'm like, yes, I just want some sci-fi.
I do wonder if sci-fi is about to have a moment. Maybe like Murderbot. Have you read any of the Murderbot books?
No, enlighten me, man.
So Murderbot is a like security cyborg that has broken its governor module and goes rogue. But instead of being like this Murderbot, and it calls itself Murderbot, and instead of being like, I will be a murderous assassin droid and kill for money and seek only, I don't know, money and pleasure and oil or whatever a security cyborg would be interested in. Instead, all it really wants to do is watch TV. Um, and that I've only read the first two novellas in the Murderbot series, but they've both been fantastic. And I want to say there's a Murderbot TV show that's going to come out in a month or two.
Okay.
So Murderbot is about to become very, very big. But I do wonder if, again, and maybe it's just my own personal taste. Maybe I have sci-fi tastes, but I have personally, I think I've read like seven, eight sci-fi books in the last 18 months. I don't think I've read any. No, I read one fantasy. I read A Court of Thorn and Roses, but that was the only fantasy, romantasy in this case, that I read in that time. And again, sci-fi just seems to be having an exciting time right now. Gideon the Ninth. Have you read Gideon the Ninth?
No, I haven't, and I hate to be super lame here, but most of the reading that I do is like informational text. Like I really I spend most I don't consume a whole in the past like maybe 5 years. I haven't really consumed much just fictional text. It's unfortunate, but
That's okay. How do you express your sci-fi fandom?
well, a lot of my sci-fi interests come from the natural world. Like I spend a ton of time. I am fascinated by technology. I'm fascinated by what we can do, and I do spend a lot of time learning about how science is changing things, and I find that stuff all awesome. I like my sci-fi to have fantasy in it. Okay, so that's like where I might differ a little bit. I like that's I mean, some people make the argument that Star Wars, for example, is more of a fantasy than a sci-fi, and I do kind of like that element. I am a fantasy fan, probably still more so than a sci-fi fan, but I like when there's a little bit of more fantasy in my sci-fi. I used to play one of the sci-fi games I played a long time ago. It was super fun. It was like a Lost in Space themed game through GURPS, actually. I had a game master and we played through GURPS, and we were stranded on a planet just trying to do this like, Danger Will Robinson kind of scenario with robots trying to kill us, and it was super fun. So
So, go ahead.
yeah, so it just, I'm down to play whatever, I'm down to do whatever. I don't necessarily, I think my itch that I'm looking for is more in the tabletop community. Maybe not in the more books and reading aspect of it, though I like following like what's going on in the natural world.
And so, any natural scientific revelations that have come across recently that you were particularly blown away by? I
Oh
will
yeah,
say
dude.
again at WindyCon it was some astronomers did a presentation on the Jim Webb telescope that blew my mind. But if you're into that kind of thing, anything recently that blew your
Oh yeah.
mind?
Dude, you want to hear about the craziest thing I've seen in the last 5 years?
Yes.
It's the Ion engine. So basically, the equivalent of the Wright brothers flying the plane for the first time has happened through this Ion engine. And I am not so math savvy that I can explain the mechanics of it, but essentially, it looks like a Wright brothers airplane with like a collapsible grid, like it's like a matrixy looking paper grid inside, and it does something where it sucks up it uses the ionic charges of the elements in the air to propel itself. And it hurts my brain just trying to think about how this sorcery works. But when I look at that and I think, oh my gosh, you think about the airplane in I believe 1912, I could be wrong, 1912, and then where we get to in the 60s. Okay, so if you want to do that, well, it was 1912 about 5 years ago. That one's crazy. Yeah, that one's going to be, I mean, an engineless flying machine.
So, an, an engineless flying machine, and it propels itself again based on charged particles in the atmosphere.
That is my understanding of it. I'm happy to link you when we're done what I saw, but yeah, it.
So,
Oh, okay, this is awesome.
and I'm slowly processing that. So, if it's an engineless flying machine, that means it does not require fuel.
Correct.
Huh.
Let's see here.
Yeah, I'm gonna Google too. Now I'm
Yeah,
really interested.
there it is. There's the picture. If you type in ionic flying plane, an ionic flying plane, also known as an ionocraft, is an aircraft that uses ionic wind to fly instead of propellers or turbines. The ionic wind is created by using high power electrodes to ionize air particles. And when you look at it, there's that sort of grid thing I'm looking at, and it looks like an old Wright brothers airplane too. And they had this thing flying. I don't know how far they've come with getting someone inside of it. I don't know how viable it is, or but um,
I
this
mean,
is back in 2018. MIT engineers fly first ever plane with no moving parts.
silent, doesn't depend on fossil fuels, no moving parts. I mean, and it's one of those things where, like, even if it got up to, well, it can carry 10 pounds, like, you build enough of them, and I mean, you can get something from here to China that's 10 pounds without using any fossil fuels or gas, or I mean, it's so freaky.
Can I talk
Like,
to you about another one? Can I
well,
talk to you about another one?
let me say one more thing and then yes,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
because you said that and I'm like, is this some internet thing? Like, is this Corey guy just like making stuff up? A plane that doesn't have an engine and doesn't need fuel? Then I Google it and of course it's like the MIT website is like talking about it. It's like, oh, I guess that's real. 7 years ago they did this. I wonder how I missed that. But yeah, I mean it. I cannot even imagine if there was a fuelless, engineless aeronautical revolution, what that would look like. So please give us another one because I am dazzled by
Okay.
that.
This one is more of a philosophical debate, but I love having this with my kids. When we were young, you always heard the joke of like, yeah, in the 2000s, I'm going to get my flying car. And when you look at drone technology, you have to be sitting there wondering to yourself, why exactly do I not have my flying car yet? And I think what a lot of people overlook is the fact that it's the infrastructure. It's not the flying car itself. It's all the infrastructure that goes into it. So just following along, like how that's going and what that looks like. And, this is going to be maybe unpopular to some people, but the only way you get that infrastructure, as far as I can tell, and I don't know, I'm just some nobody on the internet, but is that you don't drive your own cars anymore. And so the reason for that is because we get into a lot of accidents when we drive our own cars. And so if we're going to put them in the sky now, we need to make sure that we're not driving them. And so what's fascinating to me is I love, you'll watch videos about how this is all coming along and the infrastructure for all these types of things. And it's one of the greatest arguments for self-driving cars. Because naturally, I think the progression of that technology is okay, well, it's automated. So because it's automated and there's less room for human error, let's put these people in the sky. And I'm here for that.
That's crazy to think about. Wow. Well, I'm going to take 10 steps back to the Bene Gesserit litany against fear. And I'm going to say that when I first read Dune, that really struck me. Um, I was raised Catholic. So there's a lot of prayers you would memorize in Catholic school. Prayer for this, prayer for that, prayer to Saint Christopher. Um, and I came across that, and I'm like, oh, it's like a prayer, and yet to some degree, it seems to empower something different within me. And I can remember in middle school going through rough and difficult times, and I would find myself reciting the Bene Gesserit litany against fear and having real comfort come from the Bene Gesserit litany against fear. Um, and it's such a small piece of text. But within the whole of Dune, it does so much heavy lifting early on in that novel to establish both the depth and breadth of the world that Herbert is writing in. So, I mean, I teach seventh and eighth grade. Every other year, I hang up the Bene Gesserit litany against fear on the door of my classroom, and kids read it and they're like, oh, it's really really good. Any thoughts or responses? And if not, that's fine.
Yeah, I think Frank's level of prescience is I mean it's what I don't know. This is just my opinion. I view Frank Herbert as the sci-fi Tolkien. I mean, some of the things the man put down on paper are just so brilliant that it makes sense that middle school teachers and high school teachers and people just around the world would put that on their door as something to motivate people or to give them, a little bit of hope against something like fear. I found the angle that I found most fascinating from him, that I thought was so forward thinking, was that he talks about AI in a way that just, during a time when this isn't even really on people's radar. The Butlerian Jihad is like one of the most fascinating aspects of his writing to me.
If someone
And
doesn't know what's the Butlerian Jihad,
many, many years before where the Dune stories take place, computers went rampant, and people basically had to fight the computers and say, you know what, maybe the technology, we leaned on it a little too heavy, and we've learned the errors of our way. Let's figure out how we can use technology in simpler ways so that it doesn't try to take over and kill us all, or we don't end up killing each other over it.
did you ever happen to read um, in 2017, the Los Angeles Review of Books had an article by Will Collins titled "The Secret History of Dune"?
No, I have not. I have not read that one. Tell me about it.
Let me read a few paragraphs from it, because it struck me. I uh, lived in Egypt for 2 years, and when I lived in Egypt, I really came to see Dune in Islamic terms. I'm like, oh, Paul is very much like the Prophet Muhammad, for a ton of different reasons. Um, and also the spice melange is oil. Uh, but this article, although it certainly says there are Islamic sources for Dune, makes a different claim. So let me read a few paragraphs here and see what you think. Frank Herbert's Dune is a science fiction classic, in part because it's such a brilliant pastiche. Drawing inspiration from the mid century United States' nascent environmental movement, European feudalism, Middle Eastern oil politics, and Zen Buddhism, Herbert created a universe that is at once exotic and familiar. Not all of the book's success is a result of inspired borrowing, but much of the richness and depth in Herbert's imagined future of religious fanaticism and aristocratic intrigue can be traced to its creator's talent for appropriation. Melange, the hallucinogenic drug at the heart of Herbert's book, acts as a prerequisite for interstellar travel and can only be obtained on one harsh desert planet populated by tribes of warlike nomads. Even a casual political observer will recognize the parallels between the universe of Dune and the Middle East of the late 20th century. Islamic theology, mysticism, and the history of the Arab world clearly influenced Dune, but part of Herbert's genius lay in his willingness to reach for more idiosyncratic sources of inspiration. The Sabers of Paradise, 1960, served as one of those sources, a half forgotten masterpiece of narrative history recounting a 19th century Islamic holy war against Russian imperialism in the Caucasus. Leslie Blanche, the book's author, has a memorable biography. She's a British travel writer, or he, I shouldn't even say I know for sure. Oh, it's a she. She called The Sabers of Paradise, quote, the book I was meant to do in my life, end quote, and the novel offers the magnificent, overstuffed account of Imam Shamil, the Lion of Dagestan, and his decades-long struggle against Russian encroachment. Anyone who is obsessed over the mythology of Dune will immediately recognize the language Herbert borrowed from Blanche's work. Chakobsa, a Caucasian hunting language, becomes the language of a galactic diaspora in Herbert's universe. Khanli, from a word for blood feud among the Islamic tribes of the Caucasus, signifies a vendetta between Dune's great spacefaring dynasties. Kinjal, the personal weapon of the region's Islamic warriors, becomes a knife favored by Herbert's techno-aristocrats. As Blanche writes, quote, no Caucasian man was properly dressed without his kinjal. And I read this article with absolute fascination when it came out because I felt like I knew so much about Dune, the origins of Dune, Herbert's sources, and then it's like, well, no, you missed something. It's also the Islamic tribes of the Caucasus Mountains are a source on Dune, and it absolutely blew my mind.
I first of all thank you because one of the things I like about Dune lore is that I always feel ignorant when I'm learning about Dune. Like that's how rich it is. And I mean, I'm gonna definitely be checking out that article after we our hangout here. I
I'll
mean,
put a link in the show notes.
yeah, absolutely. That's so cool. Yeah, it's so fun seeing where artists get their inspiration from, right? And then, when you boil down how much of this is an original creation and how much of this is something that you've seen before, and maybe you're conscious to it or subconscious to it, but it came from somewhere.
And are you familiar with the publication story of Dune?
All of the process stuff of Dune, I have very little clue about.
He wrote it and ended up sending it to like publishing house after publishing house after publishing house, and it gets rejected everywhere. Like to my mind, it's up there with Moby Dick as like one of those great works of literature that was just not seen in some way at first. And then I want to say it was serialized in one of the sci-fi magazines. I forget which one. And then it kind of took off from there. But like, how many people looked at Dune and were like, nah. Like a lot of people looked at Dune and were like, nah. They passed on, the one of the great classics of sci-fi. You're probably right that uh saying it's a sci-fi Tolkien makes sense. Um okay, for my money, it's the best sci-fi novel ever written. I regularly give it to seventh and eighth graders, and who read it, enjoy it, and then at the end I'm like, okay, the spice melange is a symbol. What is it? And
Yeah.
they can't figure it out. They're like, drugs, it's drugs. And I'm like, it is not a symbol of drugs. Like it is related to drugs, but it is not a symbol of that. It's the what it is buried too deeply. And then when I'm like oil, watching the light bulbs go off in their head is an absolute delight. It's one of the reasons I love teaching. Um, I love my life as a teacher. If I won the lottery, I wouldn't quit teaching. I might go down to part-time, but teaching makes me very happy. So even if I instantly became hugely wealthy, I wouldn't want to give it up because I'd be giving up joy.
I'm with you 100% on that. I love teaching so much that I pretty much do it all day long, Monday through Thursday. So like as a special education teacher, right now I work with transition students. So my position now is working more like a big brother program. So
So you said you're working with transition students now. What are transition students?
sure, transition students are young adults who require special education services. They're between 18 and 22 years old. And I operate kind of like a big brother to them in many ways. I am a traditional teacher, but I also show them how to do things like comparison shop, take the bus, find a job, just learn how to socialize with people appropriately. And one of the biggest heartbreakers that I've seen in my years working in special education is how high of a demand there is for Dungeons and Dragons specifically in that community, and how little opportunities that community has to play the game. And so, running it at local game stores has been a big passion of mine to help out because a lot of them have a hard time with the social skills aspect of it, right? So, going to game stores is a great way to meet friends, learn how to play the game, learn the rules, have someone there to support you, and get out into the community. And so, I always send out that call to action to people who are game masters. It's you don't have to do it all the time, but running a one shot at your local game store makes a huge difference, and you may not realize how big it is.
One of my obsessions is uh, Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing games, not as a product, but as a practice and a community. And I think that, again, I don't know this to be true, but this is what I think, and maybe I'll be right or wrong. I think one of the biggest mistakes that Wizards of the Coast has made in the past 4 or so years is they seem to have become almost exclusively concerned with Dungeons and Dragons as a product. And they've done a number of things to harm the community or restrict the practice of D&D in some ways. Um, and that if they really, because again, they want to see D&D become a $1 billion brand. My understanding is that the peak of the game was probably 125 million. I forget what year. And that was up from 25 million, I think, in 2015. So it grew exponentially, and they wanted to grow exponentially again. And I think the way you do that is through community. And what you're talking about there, like what could Wizards of the Coast do with all the resources of a corporation, multi-billion dollar corporation behind it? What could they do just to encourage people to go and run a single game of D&D at a game store? Um, and I'd imagine it's an awful lot. But my understanding is that the D&D Adventures League is kind of collapsed. Like there are other people who know more about that than me, but it's certainly when I go to cons, it seems like there's a lot less people playing Adventures League for whatever reason. Um, so when you say that, like, it's a really cool idea. It would really do a lot to foster community and the practice of role playing games. And what is Wizards doing to help that? And again, they have done some pro community things. Like, did you have you picked up any of their like educator bundles?
I've written educator bundles and published them specifically to make the game more accessible. And in fact, I can talk to you about accessibility in the game and how that translates into their business model being garbage.
Oh, please tell me all about it. I am fascinated.
Okay, so one of the things I encountered was I used to work with emotional disability population. If you're not familiar with the emotional disability population, there's students that get angry really quickly, to put it simply. And one of the funniest things about running D&D for this crowd is like, you'd be like, well, the goblin comes up to you and he steals your food and he says, beat it, bucko. And then the kids, who are usually like ready to burst out and be like, I'm gonna beat you up, Mr. Burns. They're the first ones that are like, you know what, we gotta talk to this guy. We gotta figure this out. And it's amazing how the game has helped give them an out to behave in a way or act in a way that maybe feels foreign to them or hard for them. But they can't do that on their own because it's a difficult game to access. And I look at 3.0, 3.5, Pathfinder, all of these games are incredibly difficult to access. And so what I set out to do in 2020 was, I wrote a campaign for my kids and it was levels 1 through 15. And I decided to write, this is when I started my whole business. This is what started my whole business is I wrote a book. It's not very elegant looking. It's very simple looking, but I mean, like the text you read is green. The DM notes are gray. There are things designed in there to make it easy for individuals with special needs to run the game. And then you've started seeing Wizards adopting this very slowly as they've been producing more content. Oh, so now I can find the flavor text in a convenient little box. Oh, you're going to make these maps a little easier for me to draw. Or here's a big one. I don't know why it's taken them like 30 years to figure this one out. How about you just make like 3 pages where you tell me what the whole story is? So I don't have to read your gobbledygook nonsense with 1A, 3B, 4A, 7D. Just tell me what the story is. Because I don't want to kill some NPC in chapter 3 because I don't know if they're important or not. And so there's just like really simple accessibility things that they could be doing that they don't do. And what ends up happening is yeah, people will buy their stuff. In fact, I think a lot of people buy their stuff like Pokemon cards, but they never actually play it. They just want the shelf fodder. I can't back that up, but I see it with my students, but they yearn to play. They yearn for someone to teach them how to run the game. And, when they open the book and they try to do it, it's like, okay, I got to find all these adaptive types of things on either DM's Guild or I create them to help them to translate because Dungeons and Dragons produces absolutely zero content that is accessible for individuals with special needs. And I don't think they're aware of how big that aspect of their market probably is.
So, one thing I want to mention is uh, D&D does have educator resources, which I will be honest and say I haven't looked at yet, but they have teaching kits for grades 4 through 6 and 6 through 8. And I really should take a look at this and but I'm a busy dude and it just hasn't crossed my mind to look at it yet. Uh, so that's just a thing I wanted to point out for our audience because I try and be honest with Wizards, and when I say something like I don't think they're reaching out to the community enough, it is worth also being like, well, look at this one thing that they're doing that is reaching out to the community. So good for them on that. But uh two, um this is I maybe even contradict myself right now when I was like, what could they do with the resources of a billion dollar corporation? one of the things that has shocked me when interviewing Wizards employees and former Wizards employees from the past 11 years is how small and harried the D&D team truly has been. Um, it seems as though even though they're Hasbro and a billion-dollar corporation, it's a small team of creators, almost like flinging product out the door, it seems. Like things are not usually play tested, which again, if you were going to talk about like best practices, like you would play test stuff, you know. All of the small creators that are successful playtest stuff. Why isn't Wizards playtesting? And they're not playtesting stuff because they have to make campaigns, and they have to make campaigns because they need to make a $50 book, and they have to make a $50 book because they have to make a lot of money because they're working for a billion-dollar corporation. So please, you look like you're going to explode. Go
Oh,
ahead and
Ben.
explode.
So when I was writing Wanderverse, and I'm scouring through the fifth edition book, which I bought in 2014 at Gen Con, right when it came out, they put a spell in the Paladin spell list. It's one of the smites. I don't remember which one it is. And it's not even in the spell descriptions. Like, that blew my mind. I'm like, their team has to be less than 20 people. How do you miss that?
Well, on that note, as we're winding down, what is Wanderverse?
Well, thanks for asking. Wanderverse is an original class leveling tabletop D20 system, and I've been calling it Tabletop's Greatest Hits. Now, that's a pretty lofty title, but I've been playing tabletop games for 25 years, and there's a lot of natural things I've found that work well with people I've played with, and I've played with hundreds and hundreds of people. And there are some things that I've also adapted and created to make a system that I would also consider to be the natural evolution of the game.
Could you give any examples of it is a natural evolution of the game?
Absolutely. I met the chief designer of Pathfinder Second Edition at Gen Con a few years back when that came out, and I was enamored by Pathfinder Second Edition because I was like a what do you call them? Like those bank robbers who are twiddling their mustaches. I'm like, haha, they're gonna get D&D again. They're gonna do it. And when I looked in that book and I saw all of the hieroglyphs I have to remember to run that game, I was like, it just, cue the Price is Right, bum bum ba da. And so I was like, okay, but they're onto it. They're almost there. And the natural evolution is a point system. And what you get to do with the point system is it's not like, okay, well, what can I do in my turn? I have a move action, I have an action, I have a bonus action, I have a reaction, I have a flourish action. It's not I have this weird diamond hieroglyph that I can do a bon mot, and now I got to look up what a bon mot is. It's an evolution of the game in that if you want the standard game where you have an action point that costs to do the things you usually do, like move or make a standard attack, that's there. Okay, that's there. But not everybody is someone who is as rules heavy, crunchy rules friendly. Some people want that freedom. This does the best of both worlds because you can use your points to do things that are off script, and you just haggle with the game master. So, for example, if you told your game master, like, okay, I want to cut that rope, grab it, go up the chandelier so that it falls on the goblins, the game master can tell you how many action points that would cost. You have a certain amount that you start with. We call the action points delta in Wanderverse. You start at level 1 with 3 of them. And so you would tell the game master, hey, this is what I want to do. And the game master would say, okay, they kind of measure it out in their head. And if it's not exactly in the rules or doesn't fit perfectly, the game master tells you how many it would cost. And what makes this super unique, and this system simplifies D&D in a really fun way, is that the action point cost can be done over a number of rounds if necessary. So you might start doing that action for 3 delta, but then when you get to your next turn, your action points replenish if you don't use them, and you can expend what you need to complete this over a series of turns. So it kind of has like a weird GURPS effect, wherever. I don't know if people aren't familiar with GURPS, like what would happen is everybody tells you what you want to do, and then it all kind of happens at once, and we see like some things might work, some things might not work. So it can have that aspect of it, but it's fun in that you get to have the creative narrative freedom to do what you want. And there's one more really big thing that playtesting has shown people love is spells. I can't tell you how obnoxious spellcasting has been in Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons, especially if you're someone who's interested in multi-classing. What Wanderverse does is it removes leveled spells, and they simply have an action point cost. And what's cool about that is now, instead of all those spells that would just never be taken because of their utility, you can take these spells and you spend the action point cost necessary to cast them. So if I want to take, like, I don't know, Ben, what's your favorite spell?
Ooh, wish.
Okay, now Wish is an outlier because
Sorry.
there are like maybe no, this is great because this is something I've never explained in my channel. So Wish is an outlier. There are some spells that are extremely powerful, like Wish, and they require you to have a gemstone of a certain monetary amount in order for you to cast them. So what that does is it prevents people from being like, well, I'll just cast Wish all the time, right? Because that's what somebody would do. So you need to actually acquire this very expensive spell reagent. But any other spell, like what's a more mundane spell that you might find yourself casting?
Bless.
Okay, Bless. Bless is level 1, if I'm not mistaken.
I
right?
don't even. Let's. How about chant? How about chant? Is chant better? That's first
Doesn't matter.
edition.
I mean, all I'm trying to say is that here's an easy way to understand the delta cost of spells, which is it's for the most part for almost every spell, it's 1 delta action point more than what the spell level would be. So, for example, I use Fireball because everyone knows Fireball. Fireball's a level 3 spell. It costs 4 delta to cast.
Cool.
So, what would happen is at level 1, you could take Fireball, and on your turn, when you have your 3 action points, you'd spend them, and then you would be holding that Fireball all the way up until the start of your next turn. Your party trying to protect you, so it goes off. And then at the start of your turn, when your action points replenish, you now have that last remaining point you need to spend to cast it. But doing that gives you damage that you cannot recover until you take a long rest. So that's the downside to it. So the more you want to go high or separate the difference between what you have and what you don't have, it's a self-regulating system. So I can't just walk into a village and cast Meteor Swarm at level 1. I mean, I can, but I'm not going to live to tell the tale. I'm going to burn out. And that's fun. Some people might want to take that Yennefer approach from The Witcher, but it's self-regulating and it just has a delta cost. So you pick the spells you want at whichever level you're at.
Very cool. And when did the Kickstarter begin?
The pre-launch is up, so please join the pre-launch. We'd love to know you're interested in this tabletop game. The Kickstarter goes live March 25th. I want to say 5 o'clock. There's a counter on my website on thecommonlands.com. So if you want to know the exact second, it's up there.
Okay, well, that's so awesome. I'll make sure I put that in the show notes. Let me make a note right now. Kickstarter. Cory, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. I really appreciate it. I hope that your Kickstarter is a huge success. This was a fun conversation, and be well, sir.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and same to you.